This story is called It's Becoming Bolder. Awake, I lie in bed staring at the barely visible ceiling fan. Moonlight leaking through the window blinds illuminates a picture of my late husband, Martin, adorned in a military uniform. It was hard to sleep on nights like these. I would give anything to feel his warm embrace to make me feel safe. Martin knew that I never wanted to move here. However, it was hard to say no to that twinkle in his eye and the smirk that he carried whenever he was excited about something, and he wanted to move here. Now, I was left alone in this rustic cabin in northern Maine, miles away from my nearest neighbor. Something was different tonight, though. A tinge of unease had settled over the property. I removed my comforter and crawled on the bed towards the nearest window. Imperceptibly, I moved the blinds to look around outside. Deep in the forest, I was met by two eyes reflecting the moonlight. It seemed to be staring right at me. Releasing the blinds, I hastily shot back up against the headboard, comforter pulled up to my neck. Then I laughed. How silly was I to get worked up over something that was probably a raccoon? Morning came and I started my usual routine, drinking coffee and enjoying the view from the back deck. Dew covered the grass and the spider webs clinging to the chair where Martin used to sit. With a sudden crash, leaves and sticks were thrown up into the air about 50 meters into the woods. Standing to my feet, I accidentally knocked over my coffee. I gasped and looked around. Suddenly there was only silence emanating from the woods. No birds, no insects, just silence. Whatever it had been, it must have been very large, maybe a deer or a black bear. Making my way inside the cabin, I stopped to observe through the glass storm door. The wind picks up autumn leaves in a vortex, hurling them across the backyard. Seeing nothing else, I closed the wooden door and thought it was probably time I ask for anxiety medication from my doctor. In the late evening, I stoke the fireplace and settled into the couch with a warm cup of Earl Grey. With a quilt draped around my lower half and wearing one of Martin's hoodies, it was time for me to continue reading my mystery novel. Slowly, that uneasy feeling returned, pulling me away from reading. I searched my thoughts, wondering why I kept getting this same feeling time and time again. Looking out the window past the fireplace, night had set in. While looking upon a certain tree's silhouette, I could swear I don't remember the tree being so bushy towards the top. As a matter of fact, I was sure that that particular tree was bare and housed a nest of a lone red-tailed hawk. It was at this point that the top of the tree twisted around and those same reflective eyes glared into my living room. I sat, frozen, unable to move. The figure then jumped into a neighboring tree and slid down out of view. A shiver of ice-cold water raced down my spine, and I carefully rose from my bed, hurrying to my bedroom and securing the door behind me. I huddled in a corner, clutching a basket. My gaze filled upon the gap beneath the bedroom door. Then an unearthly howl shattered the stillness outside. Its bass vibrations rattled the house. The sound, utterly unnatural, reeked of malevolence. I spent the entire night in a state of restless vigilance, and as the first rays of sunlight pierced the blinds, I cautiously ventured beyond my bedroom. Everything appeared as it should. With measured steps, I tiptoed down the hall towards the living room, peering outside through the windows. Once again, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Yet I knew I couldn't endure another night here. My plan was clear. Pack the car and flee to my parents' house in a different state. Safety was all that mattered now. With my car laden with essentials for the coming weeks, all that remained was to retrieve my keys from the kitchen counter. As I placed one foot outside the door, an appalling sight met my eyes. A monstrous head, at least 8 feet tall, protruding from behind a tree. Its eyes were grotesque, large, and devoid of humanity. Yet they exuded a sinister intelligence. The canine head featured a short snout with a severe underbite, and its jagged teeth jutted in every direction. It resembled a grotesque hybrid, a nightmarish blend of a hyena and a lycanthrope, mane and all. The creature was closer to my car than I was. Panic gripped my heart and I stood frozen in place. The creature tilted its head as if studying me. Sniffing the air, backing slowly into the house, I locked the door, silently screaming with terror inside. What had I just witnessed? I needed to call the police, but the realization that my phone was in the car sent a wave of panic through me. The room spun, and my vision darkened. Abruptly, with a deafening crash that shook the house, I awakened from what must have been a faint. How could it be night again already? Memories flooded back, reminding me of the morning's horrors. I leapt to my feet and peered out the window. There, on the pitch-black porch, 2 reflective eyes stared back at me. Then, eyes of a similar nature flickered to life and littered the forest in all directions. Some deep within the woods, others right on the edge of my property. I slinked beneath the window, crawling back to the bedroom. Another crash against the house propelled me to my feet, and I darted into the bedroom instead, locking the door once more. Trapped, I couldn't think of any escape besides a recurring, dreadful thought of ending it myself, but I quickly dismissed that idea. Hours dragged on in silence. I dared not glance outside the bedroom window. Focusing on my breathing, I tried to stay hidden. Then, that nightmarish howl reverberated through the area, joined by no fewer than 20 others. I covered my ears, my thoughts consumed by Martin. Raising my eyes from the floor to the window above me, I watched steam fog the glass and disperse repetitively. Those creatures were sniffing around my bedroom window. I bit into my comforter and gripped it tightly, releasing nervous energy while trying to remain silent. Then, with a thunderous crash, the window shattered in the living room. They were inside the house. I could hear the heavy footsteps, eerie cackling, and bizarre whooping. My body trembled uncontrollably, knocking over my husband's picture from the nightstand. Suddenly, all noise ceased. They knew where I was. Claws scraped across the hardwood floor, drawing closer and closer. Heavy sniffing around my bedroom door, accompanied by the sight of 2 massive, spotted feet or paws visible through the small opening at the bottom. My eyes widened, and I held my breath. The door began to bow inward, and then it cracked and splintered under immense pressure. Breaking apart, the top half of the door crashed to the ground. There, towering above the door frame, stood the beast. Its jaw hung low, visible from my vantage point as it tilted its head, allowing its enormous eyes to lock onto mine. I always thought a nice cabin in the woods would be very pleasant, but some of these stories have me second-guessing that. I wonder what these creatures were. Let me know what you thought of this story in the comments beneath. I do hope that you'll join me again in the future for more Frail Blaze tales. Welcome to the Frail Blaze. Our story today: I don't want to be alone in the dark anymore. I thought I'd hit the jackpot when I landed a job as a teacher of adults. No more helicopter parents, busybody administrators, or cringy TikTok trends. I'd be working with people who wanted to improve their lives and get a fresh start. The only catch was that I'd be working in a civic center, not an ordinary school, and the classes would be in the evening. As he showed me my new classroom, the hiring agent for this new program explained to me that I'd be the last person to leave the building. Turning the lights off and locking up would be my responsibility. At the time, that seemed like a fair price to pay for the work that I would be doing. I took a look around at the yellowed tile floor, bare brick walls, and dusty fluorescent lights. It needed work, but it felt like a place that I could call my own. The first thing I did was erase the whiteboard. Written across it in huge, childish letters, I read, "I don't want to be alone in the dark anymore." Some sort of prank, I guessed. Or maybe leftovers from a really old lesson. I smirked. I erased it, and I didn't give the message much attention. I spent the next week scrambling for materials, setting up my classroom, and troubleshooting the Civic Center's outdated technology. I barely had time to look around me, much less notice the eerie solitude of the Civic Center's dark hallways. But when my first students came to the door, the knot of nervousness that had been building up in my stomach finally unwound, and I remembered why I'd taken this job in the first place. The adults in my class were of all ages and backgrounds, but they were all working towards a change. It was meaningful work with interesting people, even better than I'd hoped for. The only thing I didn't like about the job was staying late at the Civic Center. It was a large building, and my classroom was on the 5th floor. The blackness outside the windows only emphasized the empty loneliness of the night. You hear even the slightest sounds under conditions like that, and in time you find yourself wondering what might be making them. I was putting up posters the first time it happened. My students had all gone, and the only light in my entire center spilled out into the corridor from my classroom. There was no reason for anyone else to be in the building. And yet, I heard footsteps. Climbing down from the desk, I snuck my head out into the hallway. I saw no one. I chalked it up to overwork. I found myself looking over my shoulder while I left that night. A few evenings later, it was back. The unmistakable echo of something walking up and down the corridor. It was heavier, somehow. Like the source of the noise was larger and closer than before. This time, I knew I wasn't dreaming. With my keys clenched tightly in my fist, I decided I was going to find this intruder. I went room by room, turning on lights as I searched storage closets, archives, meeting rooms, offices, and craft workshops. Whoever came in must have found that everyone was gone and had left, I rationalized. But then, why hadn't I heard any sounds from the elevators? I started leaving with the students after that, turning out the lights behind me as I hustled everyone out the door. I wasn't always able to do that, though, and I began dreading the days when I knew I would be there by myself. Our minds have an amazing ability to hide from themselves that which they do not dare to see or can't explain. I told myself that it wasn't footsteps, only some late-night machinery activating or something like that. When I began to hear other sounds too, like someone crawling in the empty space between the ceiling tiles and the roof, I told myself that it was rats or pipes, or anything to avoid facing the truth that was scurrying above my head. Instead, I locked my classroom door and bolted for the exit as soon as the noises started, although later I couldn't explain why my heart was pounding and my shirt soaked through with sweat. As if to challenge my skepticism, the occurrences on the 5th floor became stranger and stranger. Lights, radios, and appliances turned off and on without warning. More than once I found myself running like a panicked animal from the sound of a microwave or the static of a television in a dark room. I got tunnel vision and barreled down the hallway, the lights going out one by one behind me. Doors and cabinets flew open or slammed shut without warning, rattling my already frayed nerves. Such things only happened, of course, when I was totally alone. I was getting spray for the whiteboard in the janitorial closet when the single light bulb burst and the door slammed shut. I ran for it, knocking over mops and buckets as I went. When I slammed my body against the push bar to open the door, I couldn't be sure if the footsteps that I'd heard in that cluttering room were the echoes of my own running feet, or something else very close behind me. Last Thursday, I was driving out of the parking lot when I realized that my house keys were missing. In a huff, I reopened the outside doors to the center and mashed the elevator buttons for the 5th floor. I reached my classroom, letting out a sigh of relief when the lights flickered on and I saw my keys glimmering on my desk. Snatching them up, I hurried for the door. Ding. The elevator. I felt my throat go dry. No one else should be in this building after hours. And if they were, I didn't want to confront them alone. I thought of heavy, dragging footsteps like I'd heard before. But when I listened, there was no movement. Even the emergency staircase was beside the elevators, so whoever it was knew I'd have to pass by eventually. What was the alternative? Spend the night in my classroom? I took a very deep breath and headed out. The light of the elevator beckoned, so bright and cheerful, it seemed like a trap. As I approached, though, the doors slid shut, leaving me in the darkness as the elevator took its slow journey back to the 1st floor. I patted my pockets for my phone before I realized with a sinking feeling that I had left it in my car. Another deep breath, and I tried the push bar for the emergency stairway. It was jammed shut. I was mashing the elevator button frantically when I heard something approaching. Not from in front, but from behind. The same heavy, plodding steps as before. I turned around, eyes wide, but I could see nothing in the darkness. A putrid smell filled the air. The thing in the dark came closer and closer until, paralyzed with fear, I felt hot breath on my face. Ding! The elevator doors opened and light flooded into the hallway. I was alone. I contacted the hiring manager, the custodians, and anyone else I could to see who might be able to explain what I was experiencing, but it all came up with nothing. There were no urban legends about the place, no murders, no disturbing burial grounds or strange lights in the sky. Just a dull, ordinary government building where I sometimes had to be alone at night. A few minutes ago, I told my last 2 students of the day to meet me by the elevators. I was going to use the restroom, and then we'd leave together. I took longer than expected. I got a little engrossed in reading the graffiti in my bathroom stall. Among the usual insults, phone numbers, and political drivel was a simple message written in pencil. I don't want to be alone in the dark anymore. I ran my fingers over it, frowning, and my heart sank as I heard a door open and close. My students must have gotten tired of waiting for me and taken the stairs out. I hurried to finish my business and leave the stall, but barely a second later the lights flickered out. I heard movement in the stall beside me. It swung open. Then those heavy footsteps dragged themselves across the bathroom floor to my own bathroom stall, stopping just in front of it. That smell, those hot, wheezing breaths. I can't get a call out because of the thick walls, and my data is spotty. But I think only the light from my phone is keeping whoever, or whatever it is, at bay. As soon as this battery dies, I won't be alone in the dark anymore. An interesting tale. It's always easier to fear something if you can't see it. Even worse if you absolutely know that it's there. Have you watched that new series, Coincidences? What a stupid name. It was no coincidence that he resembled Ted Bundy, even if they portrayed it that way. He studied Bundy's behavior for the sole reason of replicating it. He was charmed by the idea of hunting people with pretended harmlessness. A coincidence means that 2 or more things, despite happening independently of each other, add up to something for someone. A coincidence was that all 3 of us happened to be called Cynthia. Nobody ever realized this because it was so exciting. The Cynthia killer made such delicious headlines. But in reality, he didn't even know our names before the police came asking questions. The directors of the show made up some sob story about his childhood love called Cynthia as a weak explanation for why he was so interested in us. But he only chose us because he thought he could get away with killing us. And he did. The evidence against him was extensive. He was the prime suspect, and later, the only one. The police spent years searching and interrogating, and everyone was certain it was him. But he never confessed, and our bodies were never found. Nobody could prove we were dead. So he walked out a free man. And now people are buying subscriptions to see Coincidences, portraying the tragic story of a little boy who grew up to be accused of a triple murder just because he coincidentally resembled a famous psychopath. He's famous now, and I'm just the second Cynthia, a plot device for telling his story. The writers of that show made up some shadowy crook, the real killer who was never caught, so they could show artistic interpretations of what really happened to us Cynthias. I got 32 seconds of screen time when my actor was buried in Oakwood Creek, or in reality someone's backyard that played the part of Oakwood Creek in the show. Since the writers couldn't use any of the places the police had really investigated, they had to choose the most reasonable disposal site out of the ones that had never been searched. A place near where we lived, where nobody would find us. They just looked at a map, made some measurements, and pointed to a secluded little corner in Oakwood Creek. Yep, that's where I'd bury 3 bodies. And that happens to be the exact place where he really did bury us. That's coincidence for you. But instead of being awarded for their investigative journalism, the writers are handed Emmys, while I'm here with my bones bare, since everything I had to rot has already rotted away. My skeletal fingers coincidentally intertwined with those of third CYNTHIA, who was just dumped on top of me. We're right here in the ground where the internet's most popular series showed us to be, and still nobody has come for us. Instead, they're sending love letters to the man who hid us here. Welcome. I'm the Frail Blaze. Our story today is called Passenger. An unlucky driver is taken for a wild ride by otherworldly forces. It was a chilly, dreary day, and my check engine light was on. I frowned. Since I'd walked out of that fast food place along with the rest of my shift, driving had become my only source of income. If it broke down, I was screwed. Not that I was getting much work. The miserable rain was keeping people indoors, away from all the bars and restaurants that were my usual source of drunks and cheating spouses in need of a ride. My phone pinged. A job? I checked the location. Whoever this was, they needed a ride into town from the middle of nowhere. I must have passed by that spot a million times. There was nothing out there but leafless trees and abandoned factories. My frown deepened. I looked in the mirror. Between the weather and the month-long abstinence challenge I'd accepted, mostly to forget about my precarious work situation, my expression was turned into a permanent scowl. I sighed and turned out of the parking lot on my way to some random spot on the side of the state route. As expected, there was no one out there waiting for me. Just an empty black road, a rainy gray sky, and dead brown leaves as far as the eye could see. Parked in a gravel pull-off, I checked my phone again. There had to be a mistake. Nothing moved outside my foggy windows. I was starting to get a nasty feeling in the pit of my stomach. I'd seen plenty of videos of drivers being lured out to remote locations and robbed. Just what I needed, I thought. I sent another polite but irritated message to my passenger. When I looked up from my phone, I saw 2 people standing just a few feet from my car. I jumped. Where the hell had they come from? The first was a frat boy in a blue dress shirt with rolled-up sleeves and salmon shorts and loafers. Clothes for a well-heated downtown bar, not the side of the road. It was hard to tell anything about his companion, covered in so many layers of baggy clothes, hood up, face hidden. "Yo, can we come in?" the frat boy asked. He looked pale and drained. His teeth were chattering. I grunted. "Yeah, that's what I'm here for, isn't it?" It happened faster than blinking. The frat boy's companion threw him aside like a bag of trash and whipped into my back seat. The frat boy himself scrambled to his feet. He mumbled to himself as he ran woozily off through the trees. In the back of my car, the darkness and silence deepened. "I hate this time of year," came the voice from my back seat. It was as sweet and melodic as a pop star's, but with something unnerving rumbling beneath it. I heard the sound of scarves, jackets, and other layers being shed. Unable to see anything in the fogged-up rear view, I moved to "Don't turn around," my passenger commanded. I did as I was told. Looking at my phone, I noticed the ping was getting further away. The frat boy. If he had been my supposed pickup, and what was in my car? I began. My tongue felt sticky. The interior of my car was like a sauna. It was hard to think clearly.
"Oh, what?"
The voice in back pouted.
"You want money? Here, you've got it."
My passenger threw a skinny leather wallet into the seat beside me. It looked exactly like the kind a frat boy might have.
"Now let's just sit here for a bit. Relax. We all need to relax, right? Especially this time of year. It's so lonesome. Aren't you lonely?"
I grumbled again. Now that I'd been asked, yes, I did feel lonely. I'd sworn off dating apps for the month, and the only conversations I had were superficial exchanges with passengers. The days all blended into each other, as gray and featureless as the November sky overhead.
"Of course you are,"
the voice from the back seat cooed.
"Don't you miss the warmth of a tender, intimate touch?"
I mean, yeah, I guess. I gulped. But look, I felt 2 fingers on my throat. The touch was warm and intimate, so much so that my hair and everything else suddenly stood on end. Although there was a current like electricity coursing through my veins, I could feel the throbbing of my heart as the animal part of my brain screamed danger. It screamed that just 2 fingers shouldn't be long or wide enough to coil around my whole neck. Human fingers didn't have so many joints or the texture of talons.
"I can make you feel even better."
My passenger was so close that I could feel the warmth and moisture of their breath in my ear. I was still struggling to process what was happening when they lay their neck on my shoulder. If only it had stopped there. Instead, the neck slithered down my chest like a hungry anaconda. The next thing I heard was the sound of teeth unzipping my jeans. The wave of pleasure swept through my worn-out brain like a tornado through a trailer park. Its roar drowned out my fear, my reason, and even my self-awareness. It was like dying and being reborn 1,000 times per second. When I finally came back to this dull reality and my wasted body, I no longer felt my passenger's touch. I felt empty, like I'd been drained of something that I could never get back. Compared to the overwhelming sensation I'd just experienced, nothing in my life had any meaning at all. I had to have more. I tried to twist in my seat, but I was weak as a shipwreck survivor. In the mirror, I saw a girl. The perfect girl. And as our eyes met, I felt sure that had I been gay, I'd be looking at the perfect man. If I had any fetishes, they'd be embodied in this thing sitting in my back seat. Instead, a girl who looked like a combination of my high school crush, my favorite actress, and, uncomfortably enough, my Aunt Karen, smoothed out a sundress over her tanned, athletic legs and flashed a winning smile. So, I finally managed to stammer. Where to?
Anywhere with people. Campus, maybe.
When she spoke, the fear came flooding back, that voice that didn't belong to the body it came out of.
Now that I've got enough energy to change form, it doesn't really matter where I go.
My passenger shrugged, leaned back, and looked out the window without blinking once. Ever. Barely noticing where I was going, I drove to a spot by the university with a lot of clubs and bars.
Here.
My passenger ordered me. I pulled up to the curb. The knot of fear and desire in my gut made me grip the wheel until my knuckles went white. The door opened and closed faster than I could even register, which was probably for the best. Outside the foggy window, my ex-passenger smiled at a pair of students crossing the windy quad. They looked at each other, grinned, and waved back. I'm sure they didn't notice that the thing that crossed the dead grass to walk with them had moved impossibly fast. I wondered what it looked like to each of them. It started to rain again, and the three figures disappeared beneath the dorm awning. I haven't turned off my work app since. Every time I get a job, my heart pounds with the hope that we'll meet again. It's the only thing that keeps me going. And that terrifies me. Maybe this is a warning to trust your gut, to be careful around anything too perfect or too strange. But I fear that I'm just using it as a way to pass the time. Until we meet again. Our story today. When the tall man comes to town, must think you're something real special, huh? The drunk hassled the tall man, who was sitting alone at the back of the saloon. All those kill notches. Who are you fooling? He laughed. Leaning in close, he whispered to the tall man, I bet you've never even murdered a single man. The tall man leaned back before replying. About 10 myself, actually. Ah, I see the problem. You can't count to save your life, he coughed, pointing at the tall man's rifle, which was covered in many more notches than 10. Well, let's hope you're a fast learner, the drunk said, pulling a revolver on the man. You've got 15 seconds to walk your ass out that door. The tall man smiled, unsheathing a knife decorated with many scars and placing it on the table. This one's Egypt, he explained, resting a nail on a notch in the blade. 10 seconds, motherfucker, the drunk said. This one is Babylon, pointed to another notch. 7 seconds. You best get moving, the drunk barked. And this one here, oh, that's Rome. He spoke, gently picking up the knife and examining it. The drunk leapt forward, poking the revolver under the man's chin. Time's up, he smiled. And he pulled the trigger. The patrons looked on in awe as a flash burst from the barrel of the drunk's gun. A large bullet hole grew in the back of his own head, and his body slumped to the ground. The tall man remained seated and still. "Fuck you!" someone yelled, firing at the tall man, but instead hitting a customer at the table beside him. The tall man sat there counting to himself. In less than 15 seconds, the entire saloon erupted into blood and smoke. Less than 5 minutes later, the entire town was ablaze. When all was said and done, the man took a seat on the blood-soaked porch of the saloon, and he withdrew his knife yet again. Observing the ocean of ash and bodies, he took his jagged nail and he scorched one more notch into the blade. Well then, it seemed the drunk man was very mistaken. Perhaps his greatest mistake was assuming that the tall man was a man at all. Right off the bat, I want to get this out there. I do not believe in ghosts. Or did not, that was, until my experience last week. Now I'm not too sure. What changed my mind? My night at a creepy roadside motel. I guess by definition, all roadside motels can be described as creepy. Nearby highways, dimly lit parking lots, shady characters hanging out of doorways smoking, and the one me and my girlfriend stayed at last week, where I had this paranormal experience, was no different. A place well and truly stuck in the 50s, called The Lodge. We found it just off the I-95, in the middle of Maine. We were on our way to Canada to attend a wedding in the province of New Brunswick, and we're driving because 2 weeks earlier my girlfriend had the great idea to take the scenic route, because she hates flying. Why not, I'd thought at the time. What else could be more enjoyable than a nice summer drive up through Maine? It turned out that a lot of things could have been more enjoyable, for the scenic route came with a lot of rain and not much else. A storm coming off the Atlantic pounded us the moment we left Boston, the music of our car accompanied non-stop by the swishing of windscreen wipers. We had been due to stop that night in Portland on the coast with a friend, but that morning he had called to say his mother in New York was sick, and he would be spending the weekend with her. Never mind. Why don't we stop somewhere else for the night? And that is where the roadside motel comes in. It was just before sunset that we pulled into this parking lot. Over the noise of the storm, I asked, "Is this place abandoned?" Which was not an unreasonable question, since half the doors and windows in this U-shaped courtyard were boarded up. My girlfriend simply pointed to a small office, where a neon light flickered that read, "The Lodge." Just below the sign, through a dirty window, sat an old lady behind a desk, watching us. I got out into the rain. Flashes of lightning zigzagged across the black sky as I jogged between little rivers forming on the broken tarmac. Between the rolling thunder, you could hear the drones of passing vehicles on the nearby I-95. Upon my entrance into the office, a room which smelt of a mix of cigarettes and mothballs, the old woman merely stared at me, her eyes hollow and lifeless. "Are you open?" I asked, water dripping from my coat onto the stained carpet. The old woman did not say anything. She only continued to watch me with her hollow eyes. Then, like she'd been considering my request, she began to nod slowly. "Okay, how much is a room?" She rose from the chair and placed a set of keys on the counter, which had the numbers 66 attached as a tag. "Okay, yes. At this point, you turn around, get back in the car, and hit the highway." It was that part of a horror movie where the lead role finds a staircase descending into darkness, and yourself, from the safety of the audience, are screaming, "Don't go down there, you idiot!" But what do they always do? They always go down. I suppose it wouldn't be such a great story if the character slams the door shut and leaves the killer waiting in the dark, twiddling his thumbs, would it? But I digress. At the old woman sliding the keys forward, I got out $20 and waved it in the air like a white flag. $20 for the night? The old woman nodded and pointed at the keys. I glanced out the window towards the car. Lightning momentarily illuminated my girlfriend in the steamed-up car, nervously watching me. Should we stay here? I turned back round to the woman and grabbed the keys. "Thanks," I muttered, and headed out into the rain. Upon entering the car, I dangled the keys in front of my girlfriend. "Friendly woman," I said cheerily, though she said business was quiet tonight. "Yeah, just a bit," my girlfriend replied, looking round the dark courtyard. "It's kind of creepy here. Why don't we head straight on to Canada tonight?" "Nah, should be fine." I shifted the car gear and trundled it over to near room 66. "One night won't hurt us." Famous last words. Surprisingly, room 66 was fairly modern. Whitewashed walls, a widescreen TV, refrigerator, clean ensuite bathroom, potted flowers, mirrors. It almost erased our nerves of being the only guests in this rundown motel during the middle of a storm. Of course, there was a door, a locked door, that is, at the back of the room, which at the time we assumed was a small cleaning closet. I tried the handle and afterwards forgot about it, as we each took showers and then settled into bed. My girlfriend, who would have been able to take a siesta on the edge of a cliff during a hurricane, fell swiftly to sleep. But for me, it took much longer, tossing and turning until I finally drifted off. I woke around 2 a.m., and that's when the funny business started. It began with a noise on the roof. Now, it was not the pit-patter of the rain upon the flat roof. No, it sounded like footsteps, as if someone was pacing up and down. Okay, I thought, it's a bird. There's a bird on the roof. It's just a bird. Yet the more I told myself that, the more frantic the steps became, until suddenly they stopped. I lay underneath the sheets, listening. The rain had ceased, and the storm moved on, but still the howling wind whipped around the courtyard outside. Relax, I told myself, and got up to go to the toilet, using the dim lights of the parking lot to guide my way to the ensuite bathroom. Now, it was as I was in the middle of my business that the door to the bathroom, which I had purposely opened to full extent, began slowly creaking, closed by itself. My initial reaction upon seeing it in my peripheral vision was that the ground must be uneven, but then my brain began working on overtime to determine if the door had done it earlier. No, it hadn't. We were on perfectly flat ground. So now I'm doing my business in a race against time against this slowly creaking door, and the bathroom, having no natural light, is in near total darkness. And that is when my heart starts beating fast, because I have this very strange feeling that there is someone stood in the bathtub, watching me. The moment that door closes, I know that I am toast, and I would have my throat ripped out by whatever is standing there. In the last moment, I lurch for the door and jam my fingers between the gap, flicking on the light switch. There was no one in the bathtub. It was just my imagination. I stood there, panting, my body covered in a thin layer of sweat. I put the door back into its position, fully open, and waited for it to move again, disproving my theory of the perfectly even ground. It did not move, even a millimeter. I moved it into another position. Maybe it was the angle and you just had to get it right for it to move. No, it remained in place. Okay, that's creepy. I turned the lights off and returned to bed, where I lay motionless, staring up at the ceiling while my heart pounded in my ears. That's when I saw a silhouette move past the window outside. It was a faint silhouette, but all the same, something did walk past. I sat up, watching the curtains and the dim lights of the parking lot. It could have been the old lady from the office, maybe checking on something. The old lady who never said anything and accepted my $20. "Hey," I said, shaking my girlfriend awake. This was no time to act brave now. No, sir. A request dismissed. "Hey, Emily." I continued, shaking her harder. "Wake up, goddammit." But she just lay asleep, or unconscious. I felt a plunge of fear, and that's when the parking lot light went out, casting the room into total darkness. "Wake up, Emily!" I wanted to scream, but no words came out. And then I heard a key being placed into the lock of that door on the other side of the room, the one that we had assumed was a cleaning closet. And the key slowly began to turn until the lock clicked. And even though I could not see it due to the darkness, I felt a draft of cold air and knew that it had drifted open. "Oh, fuck, oh, fuck, oh, fuck," I'm thinking, sitting there next to my unconscious girlfriend, shivering with fear. "What do you want?" I called out feebly. I was answered by the flick of a light switch, revealing what lay behind the door. It was a corridor. There couldn't be a corridor, though. The motel was a small U-shaped courtyard of single units. There was surely not enough space, yet right before my eyes was a secret passage. I got out of bed. Yes, that's right. In my PJs, I stood up and started inching towards the corridor. Why? I don't know why. Something was drawing me in. It was like my body had a mind of its own and was taking me towards the corridor. "No," I croaked, trying to convince my body to stop. I could only control my neck muscles, however, so I turned to look at my girlfriend in the bed and to try to plead with her to wake up and save me from this imminent disaster that was soon to befall me. But as I turned my neck, I quickly found that she was awake, watching me with hollow and lifeless eyes like that of the old lady at the desk. "Emily?" I stuttered. She rose her finger to her lips, sushing me. Then she grinned, and blood spilled out of her mouth and ran down her chin. "What?" I never got to finish my sentence because the force that was pulling my body had brought me into the middle of this secret corridor. On either side, it ran off into darkness. There were other doors that lined the passage, doors which all had the number 666. Then, out of the darkness, one end of the corridor began to glow red. It grew brighter, and strangely I could feel a throbbing, like somewhere down there was a beating heart. I turned my head away, and as I did, I glanced back into my bedroom, where I saw that my girlfriend was now standing beside the TV, her body slumped, her face hidden by her hair, as if she was possessed or something. "Emily!" I tried to scream, but yet again no words came out. The corridor glowed so brightly now, I could feel its heat on my skin. The next part was the worst. From behind the doors that lined the corridor came the sound of voices. People I knew. A friend who'd passed away a long time ago started calling my name, beating against the door with his feet. He's calling for me to let him out, telling me it was my fault that he died. How long I stayed in that corridor for, I don't know. It might have been a minute, it could have been a day. Who knows, maybe I'm still trapped there. Perhaps in one of those rooms, waiting like my friend for the next victim to be ensnared by the trap. Somehow, however, I don't know how, I found myself back in the car. driving down I-95. I was shaking violently, and my girlfriend lay in the passenger seat unconscious. I pulled right off the highway and made it to the nearest town, where I collapsed at the front door of the nearest house, babbling incoherently about demons and witches and corridors and motels. It's been a week now, and my girlfriend is still not awake. That night she was airlifted to the main medical center, where it was diagnosed that she was in a coma. I gave my statement to the police about what happened at the motel. They don't believe me. Of course they don't. Would you? An officer told me that the lodge closed down in the 60s after a father murdered his whole family there one night. But that is my story. Emily's family is here at the hospital, and they're refusing to speak to me. They think that I tried to murder her. I rang my folks, and they flew out here a few days ago. They're with me now. My dad's been sorting out a lawyer because he heard whispers of myself being charged if Emily fails to wake up. I'm sharing this account because I don't know who else to turn to. Maybe I'm crazy, but last week in that motel, I experienced something dark and disturbing. Welcome. I'm the Frail Blaze. This story is called To See the Stars. Almost every day I wake up at 3:30 a.m. and can't go back to sleep. If I lay there tossing and turning, I only feel worse when it's time to start the day. In case I can get sleepy again, I don't want to turn on the lights and artificially wake myself up too much. Instead of tossing and turning or watching TV or looking at my phone, I choose to stay in the dark, go outside, and look at the stars. There's a huge open field behind my house, and the woods are off in the distance. The field is utterly flat and well mowed. Off in the distance, the glow of the nearby town is just enough to see anything moving in the field on moonless nights. Sometimes I will go and lay in the field and just look up at the stars, imagining that I'm floating in space, surrounded by their pinpricks of light. If I could choose a way to die, that would be it. Floating through space, with stars in every direction that I could see. The woods nearby are part of a wilderness preserve. They've been left exactly the way that they were since before this area was settled. More or less. Some kids play back there, but some of the trees are hundreds of years old. Deer will come out from the edge of the woods from time to time to graze in the field at sunup or sundown. It really is a beautiful place to live and raise a family. Last night, when I got up at 3:30 a.m. and went outside to lay in the field, I thought I saw something large and low to the ground move out of the woods and into the field as I was coming out of my backyard. The edge of the woods are a couple of 100 yards away, and it seemed too big and too low to be a deer. I twisted my head and strained my eyes to look after I'd noticed something in my peripheral vision. But I couldn't see anything. It was an overcast night, and there were no stars. The glow from the town even seemed dimmer than usual. I froze, trying to listen for, or to see if anything was there. I didn't hear anything or see any more movement. I started to wonder if my sleep-addled brain had just imagined seeing something, but whatever I had seen, or not seen, it unsettled me in its shape and the way that it moved. Straining to listen, I had noticed my heart beating rapidly. For the first time, I could hear it. It was so quiet. I had thought to myself that my sudden anxiety was ridiculous and chastised myself in the head for being afraid. My brain was just so tired. Maybe if I went in and went back to bed, I could go to sleep. There are no stars tonight anyway, I thought to myself. Turning to go in, I caught the shape in my peripheral again, seemingly motionless. But it was too late. I had my back to it. I thought I felt my heart stop. I was afraid for it to beat because I thought it would be too loud. The large, low, dark shape was still at the edge of the woods when I noticed it again. Maybe it hadn't noticed me, and if I was quiet, I could make it inside. I started to go in, stepping quietly. But as I moved and heard my own footsteps rustling the grass, I faintly seemed to hear grass rustling in the distance as well. Stopping to focus, I listened and heard nothing. I wanted to turn my head and look behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I took another tentative step. Rustling again in the distance behind me. I felt so ridiculous. Obviously, there was some animal as afraid of me as I was of it. It was moving tentatively and cautiously in the exact same way I was, afraid to attract too much attention. I resolved myself to just confidently stride inside and go check for tracks in the morning. That would help me identify the creature and alleviate my fears going forward. This time, without being careful, I just started walking back into my backyard. Behind me, the rustling. I pick up the pace. The rustling became faster, and I could tell it was getting closer. Fuck. Time to run. I sprinted to my back door and heard the sound of something large picking up the pace behind me. God, what if it's one of those black mountain lions I hear people say they've seen, chasing me? The thought of sharp claws tearing the flesh off my back, hot teeth biting into the back of my neck overwhelmed me, and pure fear kicks in. I made it to my door in full fear that death was behind me, ready to catch me the minute I slowed down. Shaking in fear and certain of my imminent demise, I struggled with the door. I got it open and turned around to slam it closed, only to catch the closest glimpse of the creature in my peripheral I'd seen so far. It was black, completely black. I didn't see teeth or eyes or anything but a low and huge black mass. I was moving too fast to see it head on, but what I did see looked wrong. I locked the door and backed away. Something bumped the door. I wasn't crazy. I was seeing something and hearing something. The door moved. It was having physical effect on objects. Again, I was frozen. I wanted to go into my room and hide in my bed, but I was afraid to turn my back on this creature again. Fuck. What was it? I stayed there until the sun came up, in terror, standing and staring at the door. I didn't hear any other sound. After seeing the light beginning to come through the windows, I got brave enough to peek out into the back porch to see if the creature was still there. I didn't want to see it, but if I could at least get a glimpse of black, I could stop at that. I saw nothing. I looked out over the field towards the woods. Nothing. The sun was coming up, and it was a beautiful day. Whatever it was has gone. Later that day, I went out into the field and to the edge of the woods while it was light. I checked everywhere along the edge of the woods and walked back to my house looking for tracks. The only tracks I saw were deer tracks. There was no sign of anything near my house. I think I might get a dog. I don't know what I'm going to do when I wake up at 3:30 in the morning, but I'll keep you updated if anything happens again. I really don't want to go to sleep tonight, and as much as I love those stars, I don't think I'll ever go out into that field and lay down to look up at them ever again. I wonder what the creature was. Or could it have all been in his own head? Many stories end with uncertainty. But let me know what you thought in the comments below. Welcome. I am the Frail Blaze. This story is called The Lake. Red. Red. Everything is red. Why is it all red? Eliza's mind raced as she tried to process what surrounded her. The young girl was overwhelmed by the screams echoing from all directions. She was afraid. Eliza didn't know how she got here or where she was. It looked like her hometown, Peterborough, but everything was red. The lake was filled with blood. The trees, bare and lifeless, crows perched upon them. Eliza sat in a small wooden dinghy gently bobbing in the lake. Hands pressed hard over her ears and her eyes shut tight. "Take me home. Please take me home," she chanted. A cold air began to surround her as she felt 5 bony fingers slowly wrap over her shoulder. Her eyes shot open as she swung her head around to see the looming figure emerge from the red lake. She gazed up at it in horror as its grip tightened. It wore a black cloak with a hood engulfing the face in shadow. "Am I dead?" she muttered. Its gnarled spine protruded out as it arched down, revealing its face. A skull, a ram or a goat. Eyes red, like the glow of sunset, ominous yet beautiful. The skull was cracked and weathered, teeth missing and rotted. It spoke. The voice was guttural, coming from all directions. "Soon." "No," Eliza shouted. Eliza pulled away from the spindly hand. The grip tightened, causing her to cry out in pain. She grabbed the ivory fingers and pulled, attempting in vain to pry them off. The creature shoved her into the lake. She sank. The darkness of the lake consumed her. Dark silhouettes of tormented humans swirled within the depths. Trapped, angry, lonely. Eliza couldn't accept this as her fate. She clawed her hands up and kicked her legs. With a final kick, she emerged from the nightmare. Her eyes burnt in the bright sun. The cool breeze washed over the pristine lake. Eliza dragged herself into the dinghy, gasping in fresh air. She lay staring at the cloudless sky, the birds chirping. "How?" Eliza stammered. She thought she must have fallen asleep in the summer heat and fallen into the lake, waking her from her dream. Eliza sat up and looked around. The sun's rays dappled through the trees and sparkled upon sapphire water. She could hear cars in the distance and the chatter of a bustling cafe. What a wild dream, she thought. "Soon," the gruff voice echoed. Eliza's heart began pounding. She looked over the edge of the boat. Nothing. She leaned further. The boat tipped towards the water. "Caw!" A crow swooped, which caused Eliza to jump, capsizing the vessel. Throwing her into the water, she emerged. Red. The screams began. The air is thick. She waded in the blood, looking for a way home. Like a spider crawling on her scalp, she felt the ivory hand. It had her. She went under, her eyes wide and mouth agape, screaming as the lake filled her lungs. One of those short, certainly not sweet tales. Well, she was warned, I suppose. But what did you think of this story, and did she have any chance of escape? In the 1970s, the mayor of my town invented a bizarre cryptid to attract tourists. I'm starting to think it wasn't made up. You've probably heard of Bigfoot, Mothman, and the like. Those are the ones who attract all the cryptid chasers. What you haven't heard of, I bet, is the Bighorn Grove pine crawler. Most people haven't heard of Bighorn Grove at all, so that'll tell you just how successful it was at reeling people in. I mean, Mothman is a neat idea. Big, red eyes, huge wings, all that cool stuff. And Bigfoot is a big old ape. That's a lot of fun. The pine crawler, he isn't that. The sightings describe him as having shaggy hair covering its head and torso, like a bearded collie dog of some sort. But its limbs are hairless, scrawny, and twice the average man's height, with claws big enough to wrap around trees, and a membrane between the limbs, like what you might find on a flying squirrel. You see blurry pictures of Bigfoot walking by a tree, or Mothman flying through the air. You wouldn't get that with the pine crawler. According to the stories, he used his freakishly long limbs to climb around the treetops and grab at its prey. But since our boy is nocturnal, and he lurks at the tops of trees, nobody ever got any pictures of him. Imagine that. A cryptid without even a blurry image. Now that's just poor. The only real images were some sketches made from the witnesses' descriptions, and a picture of the night sky and treetops taken by a witness right before it moved away from the camera. Let's talk about the witnesses in question, by the way. The mayor, Oliver Miller, had always been talking about how we needed more tourism in Bighorn Grove. The population of the town was around 2,000 in the 70s, and visitors were not very common. Mayor Miller thought a lot of profit could be made from tourists, but we liked our town the way it was, small and quiet. His attempts to attract tourists were known to us, however, so when his very own son, Michael, as well as his college-aged friends, witnessed the pine crawler for the first time in 1971, everyone chalked it up to good old Mayor Miller seeking visitors. Sightings of the creature from elderly folk, teenagers, and drunks piled up over the next decade, none of which were taken seriously, of course. In '79, the mayor unveiled a statue of the pine crawler, which was ridiculous considering nobody outside of the town had ever heard of the thing. People passing by the statue took to calling it Ollie, after our dear old mayor. Around the start of the '80s, though, the killings started. A kid staying at his grandparents' cabin for the weekend claimed that his grandpa was carried into the forest while teaching him how to hunt. 2 days later, they found the body. His legs were broken, and it appeared that his heart had given out not long after the injury. The mayor tried to insinuate that the pine crawler was responsible, to which he received no small amount of backlash. The townsfolk considered themselves a rational lot. They figured that some kind of murderer was roaming the woods. A month later, a car was seen crashed into a tree on the roadside. The cops found the owner, a young woman, much further into the forest, also with her legs broken. The cops, unfortunately, were slower to find her than a passing black bear. When a man went missing whilst on a camping trip 3 weeks after that, a massive search party went out into the forest that night. He was found with broken legs and his head caved in on a rock. He, however, was found outside a cabin belonging to one George Anderson. George was a Vietnam veteran, and he'd always been a bit colder after coming home, but the few that were close to him would have never suspected him of doing something like this. But the chief of police, unfortunately, was the nephew of the old man that had been killed, and the mayor probably saw catching a killer as a way to get back in the people's good graces. And George had at most 4 friends, so they pinned the deaths on him, and he went to jail for the rest of his days. There weren't many sightings of the pine crawler after that. Rumors were only passed around through story. I remember some guys I knew tried to make a short film about it when they were in college. They got about 50 views on YouTube, so they took it down. I returned to Bighorn Grove recently because my dad passed away last week. He got mauled by a bear whilst on a hunting trip. No real way to sugarcoat it. I take a small amount of comfort in the fact that he always joked that's how he'd want to go out. Still, what a way to go. After the funeral today, Jack invited me to come drink with him. Jack went through Vietnam with my father, and he'd always been like an uncle to me. We shared stories about him and laughed, while his granddaughter, Sarah, rolled her eyes at us. A bear, of all things. I sighed. "Listen, kid," Jack said slowly. "Kid? I'm 36, I laughed. "No, really, kid, you gotta listen to this. I don't think a bear killed your pops." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Oh, he's going to show you his conspiracy theories," Sarah teased. "Shush now," he snapped. "This is serious." He began to lead me downstairs to his basement. When the light flicked on, I was met with a wall with dozens of pictures pinned on it. Looking at them, I realized they were pictures of a creature in the trees that fit the description of the pine crawler. These weren't blurry either. These looked to be taken with a real high-quality camera. "It's real, kid," Jack said. How long have you been collecting these, Jack?" I asked him. "Your father and I started gathering proof since George got locked up. We wanted to prove that the pine crawler did this, not him." "You're saying that it killed all those people in the 80s? Why did it stop?" I asked. The old man thought that instead of driving to town for some food, he'd teach his grandson to hunt. Pine crawler didn't like its prey being taken, decided it'd teach him a lesson. The girl in the car? Thing didn't like the noise. Most people know not to drive through the forest at night anyways. The camper? Well, the pine crawler is smarter than your average bear. It saw that search parties were encroaching on its territory after the previous kills, so it snatched the camper and left him outside poor George's house to frame him. Then it stopped, because people don't go near the forest at night now, and it can eat all the animals it wants. "You've really thought about this, haven't you?" I said. And you think it killed Dad?" "Kid, in the last couple of months, we noticed that it started killing predators recently. Wolves, mountain lions, bears. It's practically clearing the forest of them. I think that's why it killed your father while he was hunting." But why, Jack?" I asked. Well, kid, I think it wants to make the area safe for its little one. He opened a box to reveal a large, reddish-brown egg. Jack, how did you get this? He looked down at the egg. I saw it in a tree this morning. I took a shot at the branch, and it fell down. Thing barely got scratched, so I brought it back. As if to demonstrate its durability, he slammed down on it hard with his fist, to no effect. I'm gonna figure out a way to destroy this egg, so we don't have to be dealing with a Pinecrawler Jr., Jack stated. Now, I'm gonna go to bed. It's getting dark out. You can use the spare room. Rest sounded very good to me right then. Neither of us were particularly sober, and he had just shown me some very strong proof that a real-life monster existed. Despite my tiredness, I figured I'd write this down before I fell asleep. That was the plan anyway, but Sarah just told me that she saw some big animal outside. It could just be a bear or something, but I'm worried. I think that the Bighorn Grove Pinecrawler is real, and it wants its egg back. Greetings, I'm the Frail Blaze. Today's story, They Prefer the Dark, by OpinionatedIMO, aka Bo Bandy. We decided to go for a drive in the countryside one Saturday morning. I'm the type of person who usually plans everything, leaving nothing to chance. I'm not spontaneous at all, and it gets on my wife's nerves. This was going to be different. It was all my idea, and I assured Tammy we were just going to wing it. She rolled her eyes. She knows me better than that. She realized even my spontaneous excursions are planned, somehow. The truth is, it bothers me to not have a game plan. I'm usually the one driving on these rogue adventures, and I have to decide to turn left or right if there's no predetermined path or destination. I hate doing that with a passion. But I wanted to prove to her that I could drive without advanced research or scouting. Inside, it was going to kill me, but I had to pretend to be okay with it. You know how couples get. I had to prove her wrong. We loaded up the car with a couple of bottles of water and snacks before steering toward the rural part of the state. In the beginning, I'd been to parts of this area before, but the longer we drove, the further I was from any comfort zone. Tammy was loving it. I'd glanced at her occasionally, and she'd have this genuine glow of contentment from the random drive. I sincerely think part of her enjoyment was relishing in my discomfort. But I wasn't about to let on. Regardless, I wasn't much of an actor, and we both knew I was a bundle of knots inside. Every few miles we'd see an old farmhouse or weathered barn with cows in the pasture. The scenery was lush and picturesque. The weather itself was beautiful too. All in all, for a random drive in the country being officiated by a obsessive planner, it was pretty darn enjoyable. I didn't feel the crippling apprehension which usually came over me when I was trying to find a specific location in the dark. It was easier to be lost in the daylight, with no set agenda. You might even say I was adjacent to enjoying myself. The deeper Tammy and I drove into Nowheresville, the more we started noticing some odd little things. There were weird symbols painted on the sides of houses and barns visible from the old country road. They weren't anything either of us were familiar with, but clearly they meant something to the locals. The first few didn't register as anything to take note of, but eventually it became a very obvious thing that stood out. In an otherwise idyllic countryside, I found myself anticipating them with each new house as we approached. All of the symbols were somewhat different in character formation, but they were similar enough to definitely be related. Neither of us spoke about them at the time, but the strange markings troubled us deeply. It was definitely on our minds when we stopped at a small country store for supplies and to use the bathroom. As it usually is the case with the folks in the countryside, the store owners were very friendly. We must have stood out like sore thumbs because they asked us where we were from. We bought food and drinks for the road, and yucked it up with them for a couple of minutes. That is, until I summoned the courage to ask what the symbols on the buildings mean. Immediately, the whole demeanor of them changed. It was night and day. Tammy noticed it too. She looked at me with a side-eyed glance as their mood darkened. To their credit, they didn't try to change the subject or anything. That would have been too obvious, but they did look down the aisles first to make sure there were no other customers within earshot before answering. That definitely raised our hackles. It was creepy as hell. The truth was apparently something outsiders like us weren't supposed to know. Suddenly, it felt like we were about to be sucked into the middle of a rural conspiracy. They leaned over and whispered, "You folks seem real nice. Please don't ask anything about them. It's for protection. And for heaven's sake, don't be around here once the sun goes down. There's a full moon tonight. And they prefer the dark." I looked at Tammy's mortified face. Her reaction was probably the same as my own. The suspense widened. We kept waiting for them to burst out laughing about winding up the big city folks, but the grins never came. They just handed us our receipt and told us to have a safe trip back home. There was a strong emphasis on us leaving soon. Like a couple of traumatized school kids, we thanked them for their prior hospitality and walked out. It was already dusk, and we were halfway across the state. We'd been seeing those bizarre markings for at least 50 miles or more. Was it some secret sect? Tammy dared to take a photo of the protection markers with her phone as we drove back towards home, but the internet services in the boonies was spotty at best. Since it was some deeply held rural secret, she hoped that maybe an image search would tell us what they meant. The country store proprietors acted like it was blood painted on their door to signal some biblical angel of death to pass them by. Night fell quickly. With us still being in the middle of Nowheresville, we were definitely spooked and needed fuel for the car. Predictably, there were no stations around, and the needle was well below empty. My OCD nerves were kicking way in. I was tempted to lash out about why this is the reason I didn't like to be spontaneous, but I held my tongue. It wouldn't have helped. The image lookup netted very little helpful information. The only thing she could find was that it was somehow tied to a secretive society of occult Freemasons. What? There were too many of them to be in on it for an inside joke on the city folks exploring back roads. We couldn't have thought there was anything other than devout religious people living in that isolated section of the country. Not only that, but what did the shop owner's vague statement mean? They prefer the dark. They made it sound like there were bloodthirsty werewolves or something roaming the woods. As laughable as it sounded, they weren't laughing when they said it, and they didn't appear to be kidding either. They warned us to be completely out of the area before nightfall, and yet here we were, running on fumes and hoping to find a gas station before we were stranded like sitting ducks. The wind picked up until it blew our little car around like a sailboat in a churning sea. If there was any good from our unplanned misadventure, it was that all the dust we'd picked up on the long drive would hopefully be blown off the car. It was barely 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, but every house we passed was as dark as could be. Not a single light was on in any of their windows. Either they went to bed early in the country, or they didn't want to invite strangers to their doors after dark. Intellectually, I knew rural folks were known to sleep early, but I couldn't help but hear the shopkeeper's conspiratorial words echo again in my ears. I couldn't see Tammy's face, but I know her well. She was dwelling on it too. Under the circumstances, it would have been impossible to ignore. As growing nightmares tend to do, the car began to shudder. It was choking on its last few ounces of fuel left in the line. I wanted to shake the steering wheel in terrified frustration, but it's an inanimate object. I'm the damn fool, goaded into proving how unprepared I could be. This was my reward. I was going to have to walk in the dark with a gas can until I found the next house. Then I was going to have to beat on their door and hope they would take mercy on us. It was the perfect check-box list of no for me. Walk alone in the dark, the full moon dark. Traverse a rural 2-lane blacktop where I didn't know a single soul. Ask for help from total strangers that could have been avoided if I'd just used my own damn head in the first place. And the piece de resistance. Be on the lookout for werewolves or Moses' angel of death sent to kill their firstborn sons or something out there. My own anger generated a certain level of false bravado, which I needed to get it done. I cursed myself for not having gas already in a fuel can in the trunk or something, but the truth is, I would have been afraid of it, as it was an explosive risk. It's hell being an overthinker. Tammy had the audacity to ask where I was going. I just turned towards her with a disgruntled scowl. She didn't mean it in the way it came out. It was obvious I had to go for help. She just didn't want to be alone in the car. I think she felt bad for all the past attempts to loosen me up, about over-planning things. Perhaps on the eve of our mutual doom, I might have won. Oh, the bittersweet irony. The two of us held hands. We'd started the journey together, and we'd finish it together, whatever that meant. Like a gentleman, I placed her away from the roadway, but it was mostly a symbolic gesture. There were no other cars driving by. She was the first to notice how quiet it was as we walked. There was only the sound of our shoes clacking the pavement. In a place with all manner of wild animals living in nature, it was deathly silent. She gripped my hand tightly. It seemed like we'd been walking for a long way, but the truth is, we were relatively lucky. The nearest farmhouse was less than a mile from our stranded vehicle. Like the rest, it had one of those arcane symbols painted on the front door. Also like the others, there wasn't a single light shining in their windows. But the driveway had 3 cars. There was definitely someone home. I had my doubts that they would answer us. We didn't want to be shot for startling them, so we made some unsubtle noises on the doorstep to announce our benevolent presence. Country folks with their 12-gauge shotguns, I hoped they would realize we were harmless and in need of help. We both heard sounds of lamentation coming from inside. If anything, they were more frightened than we were. I'd characterize it as terrified. I spoke up with my friendliest voice to reassure them. "Hello there. We're terribly sorry to bother you folks so late at night. We're just passing through from out of town, and our car ran out of gas. Do you happen to have some? We'd be happy to reimburse you. I've got a $100 bill. I can slide it under your door for compensation." A man on the other side spoke up. There was a noticeable tremor in his voice. He appeared to be trying very hard to balance his innate sense of politeness and hospitality with a crumbling wall of courage. It didn't bode well to reassure either of us. "I'm terribly sorry for your trouble, mister. But there's something very evil lurking in these parts, and you don't want to encounter it. They come out at night, and for that precise reason, we don't dare open the front door for anyone. I'd be happy to siphon some of my own gas for you, but I won't set foot out there until morning. I have to protect myself and my family. I hope you understand. Now, run back to your car and lock the doors. Quickly. Cover up the windows, and take this and put it on the hood of your vehicle in a conspicuous place. It'll save your lives." In the unnatural quietness of the night air, I heard the electronic whirl of an inkjet printer running inside the home. A piece of letter-sized paper slid under the door jamb. It contained one of those strange symbols. "Leave your fuel can on the porch. I'll bring some gas at first light, I promise. If they come for you, do not look them in the eye. Go." We did exactly as instructed, to the letter. I gotta tell you, the missus and I would have been husband and wife, three-legged race winners if we'd entered such a competition. Both of us sprinted at a pace I hardly thought possible. I could barely keep up with her. Then I scrambled for the keys to get the door open. Might have been comical if we weren't racing for our lives. Inside, we located a sun visor and blankets to block off the windows as best we could. An old paper road map and catalogs from the glove department served to complete the job in record time. We were almost in the clear when I realized the most important part of the plan wasn't in place. The protection sign was still in the car with us. I didn't have any masking tape, so there was no way to secure it to the window or hood. Using the rock as a paperweight would have blocked it from being visible. In a flash of invention, I had an idea. The SUV was so dusty from the country roads that I scrawled the symbol as large as I could into the dirt of the windshield, hood, and trunk with my fingers. I hoped that would suffice to spare us from the fury of whatever frightening creatures roamed the hillside during the full moon. I jumped back inside just in time. First, the smell hit us. It was positively rank, and the source of the stench was very, very large. We could feel them walking around the car, inspecting it. There were tiny voids in our hastily wallpapering of the windows, but I didn't dare look through the cracks. I was too scared to make eye contact. We heard them pulling on the door handles to see if it was unlocked. I have absolutely no doubt anything that huge could have simply ripped the door off. Apparently, that wasn't the point. They were checking to see if we'd taken the precaution of locking them. Tammy had to stifle a scream as the whole vehicle shook back and forth violently. I thought the intent was to flip it upside down. She looked at me with wide-eyed terror. I'd love to suggest she drew strength from my calm masculinity, but that would have been a bold-faced lie. It was all I could do to keep from squealing like a toddler myself. The things on the other side of the car were definitely not natural. That much was clear to us. Then one of them spoke with a voice, not of this earth. "You drew our sacred sigil of mercy on your vehicle incorrectly. You have parts of the character backwards, but we have decided to forgive your ignorance this time. Leave our home and never return again. Our patience is limited. Thank you, we both cried out in unison. Without response, they finally left us, but we dared not leave the impotent safety of our car to confirm their departure. Even to use the bathroom, leftover drink cups temporarily served that purpose. In the morning, the farmer came just as promised. He brought us fuel and something to eat. Not that either of us had an appetite. He saw the evidence of our nocturnal visitors and remarked how fortunate we were, especially with my botched depiction of the sigil, as they had referred to them. We thanked the man, and we were on our way. Neither of us breathed a sign of relief until we reached the suburbs. I drove through an automated car wash and blasted off the layers of dirt from our terrifying ordeal, but it didn't do anything about the claw marks and unnatural dents into the metal. I told my co-workers it was from a grizzly bear attack. That would have been horrific enough, but the truth was infinitely worse. These so-called grizzly bears could speak, read, and took considerable umbrage to my poorly drawn protection sigils. My insurance agent demanded to inspect the damage first. He asked me where it occurred, and I told him he adopted the same pale demeanor as the country store owners. He knew what we faced that night. Obviously, there had been some other claims like ours over the years. Without acknowledging what we both knew, he said, "You two are lucky to be alive. Don't go back there again. Your claim will be covered in full. And one more thing. That sigil should look like this." He pointed to the clean area of the windshield where I had drawn it. Despite it being washed, you could still see the remnants of my artwork on the glass. He took his finger and reversed one of the vertical marks in the middle. Now I know the correct way to draw it. More importantly, Tammy doesn't try to stop me from planning every single detail of our trips anymore. She finally sees the benefits of not being a spontaneous person. Win-win. Welcome. Our story today. I'm being followed by a fly, and I don't know why. After swearing he would never drink again, Evan decided he needed one last hurrah. If he was going to truly quit drinking, then he wanted to get drunker than he had ever been before, as a way of saying goodbye to the experience. Where am I? The entire night was a blur, and the morning had been as well. Evan found himself walking around the block, trying to sweat out the booze. He felt absolutely terrible. I never want to drink again. The splitting headache was excruciating. But what really bugged Evan was this incessant buzzing circling his head. Evan walked quickly up the block, hoping that the bug would leave, but the buzzing persisted. "Piss off, fly. Can't you see I'm hungover?" he said. Evan started flailing around wildly to try to smack the bug out of its orbit around his head. Across the street, an elderly couple stared in Evan's direction. "Fuck, they're gonna think I'm crazy," he thought. "Sorry, just a fly." The elderly couple turned around, walked back inside. Assholes, he thought. They completely ignored me. The buzzing started again. Where are you, you little flying fucker? It must have been a fly on account of how loud the buzzing was, but he couldn't see it. Maybe it was a gnat? Whatever was making the sound, it was practically inside Evan's ears now. Fuck. Evan swatted at his ear. Fuck this shit. He started running back to his apartment. He'd recover in the comfort of his room, maybe have a beer to take off the edge. Just one beer. Then I'll quit, I swear. Evan jogged home, making sure to cross the street multiple times, but the fly just kept following him. Persistent bastard, I'll give him that, he thought. No matter what he did, he couldn't shake the noisy insect. He got to the apartment as someone was opening the front door. Out of the way, coming through. Evan jumped right past them and through the door. They seemed not to notice at all. He ran to his unit and saw the door wide open. His roommate must have been trying to let the breeze in, since he refused to turn on the AC, even in the scorching summer heat. I'm back, Evan said, to no response. His roommate was playing Xbox with the headset on. You'll never believe this. A fly followed me my entire walk, all the way home. That's weird, right? His roommate didn't break eye contact with the screen. The buzzing started again. Motherfucker, he followed me inside? Evan thought. He had a novelty salt-shooting gun for insects, an assault gun buried somewhere in his closet. This fly was toast when he found his fly-killing salt shooter. Just wait, you asshole. I'm a crack shot, he said. The door to Evan's room was ajar, and after taking a step inside, Evan knew something was very wrong. If I'm standing here, then who's that? Lying on the floor in a pool of vomit was Evan. A bottle of whiskey still in his hand. A small swarm of flies had gathered around his head, buzzing right into the corpse's ear. This story is called I Found My Dog After It Went Missing, but Something's Off. My dog, Bailey, went missing a few days ago. I'd been out all day with my friend, bearing in mind I'm usually home for the majority of the day, on account of being unable to work. So the dog is never alone, and usually if he is, it's not for very long at all. I also live with my parents and my brother, so much of the time there's at least one person in the house. Monday, I'd gotten home later than usual. My parents hadn't got home from work yet, and my brother had left to stay at his girlfriend's for a little while after I had left. As usual, I'd walked into the house shouting to Bailey that I was home. I walked into the kitchen to unlock his crate and let him out when my heart sunk. The crate door was wide open. I didn't panic straight away. I thought maybe my brother had forgotten to put him in his crate, although deep down I knew that the cameras and alarm would have picked up any movement. It had been about 10 minutes after I got home when I realized that the back door was still wide open. I immediately rushed outside, looking around the garden to see if Bailey was out there. But within seconds I realized a part of the fence was broken, and he must have somehow squeezed through it. I ended up calling my parents, and then my brother, who was adamant that he had locked the back door and put the dog in his crate, although it wouldn't be the first time that he had forgotten to do so. I then ended up checking the cameras that in my panic I'd completely forgotten about. This, however, freaked me out a bit. On the camera, you could clearly see my brother putting Bailey in his crate, locking it, and then checking that all the doors and windows were closed. My heart sunk. I felt violently ill. The only way that he could have gotten out would have been if someone else had broken in. The thought brought up so many questions. How did they unlock the door? How was there nothing broken? Why didn't the camera motion detector notify anyone? I skipped ahead to see if the camera had found anything. Maybe my brother had come back, or something like that. I got to one part in the recording and realized the dog was no longer in his crate. The door was wide open as I had found it. I went back a bit, but the recording didn't seem to have picked up any movement between the time he was in his crate and when he was gone. Nothing had shown up on any of the other cameras either. At this point, everyone was absolutely heartbroken. We didn't think any more about this weird situation. We were too busy asking anyone and everyone if they had seen him. We put up posters, asked around on social media. We were so determined to find him. I started getting nightmares. After the first night that he was gone, I'd often wake up in cold sweats multiple times in the night. I couldn't stomach the awful images and thoughts surfacing in my head about what could have happened to him. I have been so attached to that dog since the moment we got him. To think that he was never going to come back, that thought was just unbearable. So when we found him today, Thursday morning, I felt like I could actually breathe again. We were all so relieved to have him back. That was until now. Bailey had been off ever since we found him, but originally it was just brushed off because he'd never been away from us that long, and we thought that he'd obviously been shaken up a bit about it. My parents still keep saying that, but his eyes, they're not his eyes. They're not those cute, innocent, little puppy eyes. They're dark, cold, and empty. And I know you could say that it was just from being alone outside for days, but there's just something wrong, and I know it. No one believes me, but that is not our dog. Bailey was playful and would cuddle up next to you, and you'd feel so happy and loved. But this thing acts, and it pretends to be Bailey. But I swear, it's not. The way it stares at me like some sort of prey. When it cuddles up next to me, all I feel is cold. My anxiety feels at an all-time high, like this dog, this thing right next to me is dangerous. It looks at me like it knows. It knows that I know. I've ended up staying at my friend's house for a few days. I just don't feel safe at home. I've been looking back on the cameras over and over, and I swear I can see some kind of shadow. My friend said my brain is making it up because I want to see something, for some kind of explanation to exist. Maybe she's right, but I don't know. I swear to you, in the back of the garden, the same hour Bailey went missing, there's a face in the bushes. And it's not a human one. The figure is so hard to see, but it looks lanky, and it's on all fours. And it's staring right at the camera. That figure is the same silhouette that I can see on the kitchen floor, on the kitchen camera, after Bailey miraculously disappeared. It's completely unnerving. I want to stop looking, but I can't seem to pull my face away from the screen. I don't know what's going on. I just know that dog at home, if it even is one, is not Bailey. And I have a sinking feeling it'll do anything to make sure no one else finds out that it's not. Our story this time is called Ethan. Once upon a time, in a sleepy little town, there lived a young boy named Ethan. He was known for his wild imagination and his talent for drawing. However, Ethan's life took a chilling turn when a traumatic incident left him scarred, both physically and mentally. It all started on a dreary afternoon as Ethan walked home from school. Wanting to save time, he decided to take a shortcut through a desolate park. As he strolled past the old, rusty playground, something caught his eye. A peculiar-looking doll laying abandoned in the dirt. Drawn to its strange allure, Ethan reached down and picked it up, unaware of the dark secret that it held. That night, Ethan drifted off to sleep. He was thrust into a horrifying nightmare. He found himself trapped in a pitch-black room, an eerie silence hanging heavy in the air. In the corner of the room stood the doll, vacant eyes piercing through him. Its presence exuded a malevolent aura that sent shivers down his spine. The dream was suffocating, drenched in an unexplainable terror that Ethan couldn't shake off. From that moment forward, Ethan's life spiraled into a nightmarish existence. The once cheerful and imaginative boy became a shell of his former self. He became plagued by paranoia, hearing faint whispers and catching glimpses of sinister shadows lurking just beyond his vision. Days turned into weeks, and as Ethan continued to struggle with his mounting fear, he stumbled upon a forgotten sketch tucked away in a dusty corner in his room. It was a drawing he couldn't recall creating. His hands trembled as he stared at the paper. The sketch portrayed a monstrous figure with hollowness in its eyes and a twisted grin on its face, an uncanny resemblance to the doll he had discovered in the park. It dawned on Ethan that his nightmares were bleeding into reality. Haunted by the doll's malevolence, Ethan found solace in his art. Late into the night, he would feverishly draw, his creations growing darker and more disturbing with every stroke of his pencil. The pictures seemed to come alive, emanating an unsettling energy that permeated the room. It was as if the essence of his torment had materialized onto the paper. Word of Ethan's eerie drawings spread throughout the town, and fear crept into the hearts of the townsfolk. Whispers circulated, casting doubt on the nature of the boy's soul. Parents cautioned their children to steer clear of him, wary of the sinister influence they believed had taken a hold of him. As Ethan's mental state continued to deteriorate, his drawings took on a life of their own. They mysteriously found their way into the hands of those who doubted his suffering, revealing their deepest fears and haunting them relentlessly. The town fell into a state of panic, gripped by an inexplainable malevolence that seemed to emanate from Ethan's very being. In the final throes of his torment, Ethan's drawing took an even more sinister turn. His last creation depicted himself trapped within a nightmarish realm of his own making. In the drawing, he was surrounded by twisted figures that seemed to reflect the demons that had consumed his mind. The morning after he completed the drawing, Ethan's lifeless body was discovered in his bed. the sketch resting by his side. To this day, the people of the town warn against stumbling upon one of Ethan's drawings. It is said that those who gaze upon them are cursed, plagued by the tormenting nightmares and the sting of inexplicable misfortune. They caution others to avoid the desolate playground where it all began. It is whispered that the doll that corrupted Ethan's mind still lurks in the shadows, patiently awaiting its next unsuspecting victim. The townspeople share chilling stories of encountering the doll's presence, describing its hollow gaze that seems to follow them, and the unnerving feeling of being watched. Some claim to have heard faint whispers on the wind, carrying echoes of Ethan's torment. Others recount sleepless nights, haunted by nightmares that mirror the grotesque imagery within his drawings. In hushed tones, they exchange warnings, urging one another to steer clear of the park where the doll was found. They believe that the playground has become a portal to the realm of darkness, where the boundaries between nightmares and reality blur, a place where the doll's influence lingers, waiting for a new victim to cross its path. As time goes on, the story of Ethan and the malevolent doll becomes a cautionary tale passed down through generations. It serves as a chilling reminder of the depths of the human psyche and the horrors that can emerge from unresolved trauma. And so, the legend lives on, instilling a sense of unease and curiosity in those who hear it. It serves as a reminder that, even in the seemingly ordinary, there may lie an unsettling darkness, waiting to awaken with a single touch or a fleeting glance. Welcome. I am the Frail Blaze. Today's story: I'm never hooking up in a cornfield again. Chaz and I had only been together since the beginning of the summer. Still, based on his reputation of being kind of a player, I was surprised that we had lasted that long. He hadn't really dated many girls from our school, but he was always rumored to be with someone. In fact, he'd take girls from other schools to house parties, but he would never show up with the same one twice. I had always thought he was very, very good looking, but I never even thought that I could approach him. He was popular, and I was not. I had friends, sure, but I wasn't even close to the same social level as he. We had chemistry class together, and we were assigned as lab partners. That's how we met. A cliché, I know, but it was still pretty cute to me. I never had high expectations for love. My tastes were simple. I was pretty nervous at first, but he was easygoing and made me laugh a lot, so I relaxed around him in no time. We'd sometimes meet at my place to work on a project, but that soon progressed into dates out somewhere. He'd take me any place I wanted: the movies, the fair, bowling, and so on. He was a very sweet, charming guy, too. It was easy to fall for him, despite the murmurs I'd overheard around us. That's not gonna last. Who even is she? How much do you want to bet that he'll dump her before homecoming? I didn't care much for gossip. He never made me feel insecure in our relationship. As far as I knew, his eyes never strayed, and he never snuck off to meet other girls. I'm pretty sure all the people talking were just jealous of what we had. I had to admit, I was nervous about having sex with him. The first 3 months together, we only ever got to second base. But things would sometimes get a little more heated. Still, we never actually got there. But he never pressured me. He never got upset when we stopped, either. I was starting to think some of those rumors were just lies. My Chaz couldn't have been the douchebag player everyone said he was. When October rolled around, I felt even more secure in our relationship. I had thought that maybe I'd just been a summer fling or something, but when the new school year started, and we were still going strong, I felt better about it. So one day, I decided to stop fooling around. Since Halloween was just around the corner, he took me on a haunted hayride and protected me from all the spooky creature actors that would pop up to scare us. We got caramel apples and mingled with some friends that had caught up with us. He held my hand the entire time. Sabrina, my best friend, pulled me aside at one point. So, is tonight the night? She wagged her eyebrows comically, causing me to laugh and shove her playfully. My face was beet red. I mean, I don't know. Maybe. Aubrey, this is huge, she squealed. And I quickly shushed her. I mean, did you plan it? Do you think he's got something romantic in mind? I shrugged one shoulder. No, I haven't told him, but I figure being spontaneous is kind of fun, right? Totally, she replied. Just be safe, okay? No hanky-panky if he doesn't have any protection. Yes, ma'am, I replied. As the night came to a close, Chaz and I extricated ourselves from our friends and began to head to his car. In a bold move, I began kissing him passionately, pressing my body close to his. Hands began to roam, and when I didn't stop him, he withdrew. Both of us breathing hard, I could see his eyes were glazed with desire, searching my face. I gave him a languid smile, one that was full of promise. Are you sure? He asked. I nodded, pressing closer. Okay, I know a spot, let's go. He drove us out of town, and just a couple of miles into the highway. Soon I saw faded farmhouses vaguely illuminated by the moonlight, along with the silhouettes of silos and lake-grazing animals. Vast fields of corn surrounded us, much taller than us, and so dense it seemed almost impenetrable. Kind of spooky, isn't it? I said, shivering from the cold. Well, it is spooky season after all, he said as he draped his jacket over my shoulders. Then he held his hand out. Come on, I'll take care of you. It'll be fun. I took his hand without thinking, and he began to guide us through the corn. He used his phone to illuminate the way. I kept close as he parted the stalks. I was completely on edge, every fiber in my body tense. Fear coursed coldly through my bloodstream. Not too far now, he said, squeezing my hand reassuringly. But he seemed to be shivering too. His breath a bit labored. His pace even quicked up a bit. I was struggling to keep up. You okay? I asked, nearly panting. When he glanced back, I saw he was smiling, his face flushed and his eyes glinting. There was something sort of strange about it, but I just dismissed it as jittery anticipation. Simply amazing, he said. We soon reached a small, secluded area that had enough room for us to move around. The corn was still like a fortress around us. But I found a bit of solace, not just in the company I had, but also in the vast expanse of stars in the inky night sky. The moon showed only half her face, but it was still a beautiful sight. Chaz turned his phone light off, bathing us in shadows, but I could still see his smile. A neat row of pearly white teeth, bared in a way that had a hint of menace. I took off his jacket and laid it on the ground, if only so I could mask my nervousness. This is nice, I whispered, clearing my throat. Private, too. No need to keep your voice down, babe, he said. No one's going to hear us out here. He approached me, crushing me to him. His kiss wasn't nearly as tender this time. It was frantic and fierce, his teeth pulling on my bottom lip. I tried to match his energy, attributing his sudden change to pent-up sexual frustration. Then, his hands were under my shirt, raking up my ribcage and further up. I tangled my fingers through his hair as he kissed along my jaw and neck, sure to leave a mark. Once my shirt was off, I hesitated, pulling back. His heated gaze ran over me, and I suddenly felt shy. The cold made goosebumps appear all over my skin. I tried to cover myself with my arms, but he stopped me. "You're so beautiful," he said, almost as if in a trance. "I never want to stop looking at you this way. All mine, forever." His words made me melt, and I kissed him once more. He lowered me to the ground, my back against his jacket. I looked up at the stars momentarily as he climbed atop me, still peppering my face with kisses. One of his hands trailed up my neck, his fingers wrapping lightly around my throat. Arousal warred with a tinge of fear within me, but this was my Chaz, and I trusted him. "I love you, Aubrey," he whispered against my lips, "forever and ever." His fingers tightened some, partially cutting off my breathing. I squirmed uncomfortably, tapping at his arm to try to get him to ease up. I stopped kissing back and tried to move my head to the side, but his fingers tightened even more. He pulled back to look down on me, his eyes wild and glazed over. A trickle of saliva was pooling on the corner of his lips. "Quit moving around. Don't you love me? Don't you want to be with me forever, too?" He growled angrily. "You're special to me, Aubrey. That's why I'm trying to make this as easy as possible. Stop moving." His body caged mine in, keeping me in place. I tried to speak, but I couldn't form the words. I couldn't even gasp. Panic flared throughout my body, and I thrashed, trying to push him away. My vision was swimming, and I clawed at his arm, raking my nails on the skin that I once tenderly caressed. In my mind, I begged for help. I prayed to whoever might be listening, whatever merciful being might look kindly upon me. With every waning beat of my heart, I held out hope that this wouldn't be my end. Where had I gone wrong? Were there signs that I hadn't seen? Oh, please, I don't want to die. When consciousness was beginning to elude me, the stars blurring into streaks of light, I heard a rustle nearby. Chaz did not seem to notice this, and for a moment I thought I might be hallucinating. I was losing my strength, so my limbs relaxed, even as I wanted to keep fighting. The rustling grew louder, and from the corner of my eye I could see the cornstalks being jostled. Was someone approaching? Distantly, I felt the need to scream for help. Then suddenly, a figure appeared behind Chaz. A tall girl with long, tattered black hair. Her skin looked gray in the faint light and caked with dirt. Her leg was broken at a strange angle, causing her to limp. Her face was mostly covered by her hair, but I saw a flash of dark, empty eyes. The rustling continued, and another figure appeared. Then another. More and more girls stepped out from the shadows, 6 in total, all in different states of decay. A couple had been brutalized. One had her head caved in, the left side of her skull nothing more than a dark crater full of rot. Another had one eye hanging out of its socket, the iris covered with a milky white film. One had her throat slit, the wound like a second smile that bled a black substance. She was the first to take another step forward, wrath and hatred written all over her face. I wondered if she was an angel. Chaz finally seemed to snap out of his trance, looking up at our new companions. His eyes zeroed in on the girl that was still marching forward. Ella? He whispered, his voice wavering. No. His eyes nearly bulged out of his head in shock, and his hand loosened around my throat. I sucked in air immediately, coughing violently. But he was too afraid to even notice me anymore, rolling off of me and trying to skitter backwards. He yelled, "Serena! Oh God, it's not what you think," Chaz begged. The rest of the girls shambled forward, their faces an equal mask of fury. I tried to drag myself away, but I didn't get very far. I was still too weak. I heaved and retched on the ground. The back of my throat tasted like metal. "Aubrey, help! Help me!" Chaz threw himself towards me, trying to get a hold of my ankle. "No! You can't do this!" One of them, the girl with the hanging eyeball, leaned down, the corners of her lips still twitching up into a smile. When she spoke, her voice was like smoke, so low it almost made the earth tremble. "No one can hear you out here." The girls descended upon him like vultures on carrion. With supernatural strength, they began ripping him to shreds. I could hear the flesh tearing even over his screams. I could hear his gurgles as he drowned in his own blood. Then they dragged his body away, like a felled hunt to be consumed later. There was an all-consuming silence, in which I could only hear the blood pounding in my ears. I kept expecting to be attacked next, perhaps in an act of scorn or jealousy. Instead, when they emerged once more, they helped me up, and they silently guided me back to the road. Their grip on me was cautious, and their gazes were sympathetic. There was something entirely surreal about the whole thing, but I was just grateful that my prayers had been answered. Once we were back by Chaz's car, I turned to them. "How can I ever repay you?" I asked, my voice rough and gravelly. The one with the slit throat, Ella, shook her head. "He's gone. That's all." "Thank you for saving my life," I whispered, giving them all a grateful smile, tears welling in my eyes. As best as they could, they smiled in return. When I pointed to the car, they nodded, silently promising to take care of it. I wanted to say more, but one by one, they receded back into the shadows without so much as a second glance back in my direction. While I slowly walked back home, the sky gradually lightened, burning orange and gold. I was shivering, and my teeth were clacking, and my neck hurt, but I was alive. I could only wonder what would become of those girls, but I hoped that they could finally find some peace. Justice had been served, but I would not let anyone forget them. As for me, I should have known that relationship was too good to be true. Losing my virginity in a cornfield was a stupid idea anyway. Well, a terrifying situation for one became a terrifying situation for another. Two of my friends and I had gone camping once deep in the woods. My friend, let's call him C, owned a log cabin. We made a tradition of going there for a week every summer, spending most of the time hammered and making fools of ourselves where nobody else could see. The camp is far away from civilization. It's a 30-minute drive down an old logging road in a small town. We have no cell service or even electricity. We either cooked our meals on the barbecue, or if we were feeling adventurous, we used the open fire. It's nice to just get away from everything and everyone else. On our second night, my other friend, let's call him Jay, suggests that we make a really big fire, high enough to reach the moon, he said. And we did our best, piling up all the wood we could gather into a small mountain and lighting it into a roaring inferno. C tried to roast a marshmallow on the blaze, but it burnt in seconds before it was even within a foot of the fire, melting and crumbling to dust. We were pretty drunk by then, and we started jumping around the fire and chanting like we were part of a cult or something, making spooky faces at each other, laughing all the while. When we finally tuckered out and sat down, the bonfire was dying down, and I could just barely make out a distant sound that I realized had been going on for a while. I just hadn't registered it under the blaze and the noise we were making. I couldn't make it out that well. It almost sounded like something coming from a speaker. That, or I was just really drunk and was mistaking the wind for something else. I asked my buddies if they had heard it, and Jay laughed. Hear what? Sounds like, I don't know, someone playing music, I said. Jay laughed again. Music? All the way out here? At what? He checked his watch. 2 a.m.? You're going crazy. I turned to the direction I thought it was coming from. The cabin was in a big clearing, and there was a really thick patch of trees to the left of it. That's where it seemed to be coming from, somewhere in the distance. I hear it too, C affirmed, turning to me. It's just the wind. It whistles like that when it goes between the trees sometimes. Messes me up too. I nodded. We packed it in soon after. The next night we didn't go as crazy with our fire, but we still kept it going pretty good. I didn't drink as much that night, still recovering from my hangover from all the drinking the night before had given me. We chatted and joked, along with the crackling fire. Jay started to tell a spooky story, but he forgot the ending at the most important part, and we were just laughing at him. Something tickled my eardrums. It was that same distant sound again, subtle enough that it took me a while to notice. I watched in the direction it came from, as if I was going to pierce through the trees and the darkness and see the source. What's up? Jay asked. It's the same sound I heard last night. It really sounds like music, like a radio or something. Listen. You sure you didn't drink any tonight? Who the hell is going to be doing that way out here? C spoke up. Well, actually, remember that little clearing we walked by when we went on our walk down the path today? That's a public camping spot. Now, not many people drive all the way up here. I can't imagine it's very well known. But I have seen and heard people camp there before. Still, they must be playing it pretty dang loud if we can hear it all the way here. Wasn't that like a mile down the trail? I asked. They probably think nobody's nearby, too, C said. J called it in early, and C dozed off once the fire died down. I watched the last bits of wood crackle for a while longer, listening. It was definitely music. And when the fire died down completely, I caught just a bit of it before it shut off, too. It sounded like some old-timey band song, but I couldn't be sure. I woke up C, and we went to bed. I remember thinking it was weird we hadn't heard the other campers during the day at all. We took a walk up to that campsite the next day. Nobody was there, but there were ashes in the fire pit and a beer bottle. See, just some dudes having some good times like us. Another fire that night. We kept it low and started to make s'mores. The moon was full in the sky, but the rest of the night was shrouded by a thick blanket of clouds. The fire crackled quietly around midnight when Jay perked up. Well then, I hear it now. I listened. The muffled music was subdued under the fire, but there wasn't any wind that night. You could hear it a lot better. They really like to party, Jay laughed as it grew louder. It wasn't exactly the kind of music you'd crank up and jam to. It went through total bangers such as Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and some other old tunes I didn't recognize. The speakers were peaking as it echoed through the trees, interrupted by bursts of static. This fucking sucks, man. Jay had to speak up a little. C was a little tipsy. All right, this is just BS. We gotta tell them to turn that shit off. So we got in C's car. I drove since I hadn't drank anything. As we made our way down the path between the thick trees, the headlights our only light, the three of us were unusually tense. It was kind of creepy. What kind of guy plays kid songs that loud in the middle of the woods? Of course, I guess it could have been a family with a kid or something, but that loud past midnight? I know that at the time, I had this really bad feeling in my stomach that was telling me it was a bad idea to go there. As we approached, the volume seemed to lower, but we could hear it more clearly. It was close. It sounded like there wasn't just one speaker playing the music. Huh? I muttered as I brought the car to a stop, the headlights shining onto the campsite. Nobody's there, Jay said distantly. The camping spot was empty, but the music was definitely coming from somewhere nearby. That feeling in my gut grew stronger. Why was the camp empty? Where the hell were they? I wanted to turn back, but C got out before I could say anything, and he just started shouting. Excuse me! Hey! Jay and I followed him as he walked to the edge of the camping spot, peering into the thick brush. The moon was covered by the clouds, so I could barely see anything. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star was playing again on what sounded like 4 different speakers at least. They were a little out of sync with each other. See, let's go back, I started to say, but he pointed to something in the trees. No, come on. I see his fire. Jay followed after him as he dove into the brush. Hello! Hey, buddy, could you turn down the music, please? Sorry to bug you and all. It's just a little too loud. After hesitating, I went after them, smacking the bushes aside. I saw a faint orange glow cast on the trees ahead. I found it weird that they had their fire in there instead of the perfectly good fire pit. Hello? C continued. We're from the cabin down the road. Could you please turn it down? It's really bugging us, and... I was lagging behind a bit. C and J's shadows spread out from the flickering glow. I heard a subtle noise like running water or people talking under the music. I tripped over something and nearly bumped into Jay. I turned back to see it was bottles and empty cans of fish where I had tripped. There was random junk scattered all around. "I see him," Jay said. The fire flickered, the light licking and fading across the trees. I could make out someone sitting against a tree, their back to us. "Hey!" C shouted again. He walked into the tiny clearing. "Buddy, look, sorry to bug you, but please, could you—" He stopped mid-sentence. Jay stumbled to the ground when he came up to where C was. I maneuvered around the big tree in front of me, just in time to see the figure behind the tree slowly stand. The full moon peeked out from behind the clouds, casting a silver sliver across my friend's two frozen forms. The orange glow in the clearing grew brighter over the figure, lighting half of his face in a otherworldly way. He was unshaven, probably unwashed. His clothes were all torn up and dirty, and he looked old, at least 60. His eyes sparkled with a wild glint when he caught sight of us, his beard curling up into a smile, and then he opened his mouth wide in a big O, and the music became louder. It was impossible, but it sounded like it was coming from him. C screamed, and I don't know why I thought it would be a good idea to get closer, but I did. The old man's face twitched as a burst of static crackled from his mouth. He looked right at me, and I saw pure glee in his eyes. It sounded like he had swallowed a radio. The sound was coming from deep inside of him, from his lungs or his stomach. Old MacDonald had a farm started bursting from his throat. He chuckled, a deep, throaty chuckle of a chain smoker, and the music rose and fell along with his laugh. It was like the music was being played through a filter of his voice. The orange light flashed and blinked on his face, and his eyes rolled back in his head. It was then that I noticed that his feet were not on the ground. I shook my head and stared hard. He was floating, just a few inches off the dead leaves. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but when a loud crackle of static came from the right, I turned to the source of the light. I really thought I was having some crazy nightmare, that I wasn't really awake. J and C were both staring at it too, pure horror radiating from their faces, their bodies stock still. There wasn't a fire. I still don't really believe what we saw then. The source of the coppery light wasn't a fire, but a swirling mass of coursing shapes bundled together in a ball, floating just under the canopy of the trees. My jaw dropped. My eyes hurt looking at it. It was around 10 feet wide, and it didn't appear to be solid. It was like fire, but it wasn't fire. It was almost gaseous, or like a ball of electricity, I don't know. And it flowed with these shapes that weren't quite humanoid. They spun and swam through the ball like fish. I could hear them humming and chattering to each other. And in the center of the glowing mass of specters, there was a portable radio. It floated there in the middle, sparks flying off of it. And it would twitch, and you'd hear a loud burst of music come from the radio instead of the old man. I felt my eardrums throb, ringing, and I could hear, just barely under all the sound, the shapes whispering, the music in repetition, instruments and all. The three of us stood there, stock still, looking deeply into that swirling ball, I don't know for how long, completely frozen, when I noticed something in the corner of my eye. There was a barely visible thread or tendril of the orange light streaming towards the old man. Prying my eyes from the orb, I turned to face the man. He was slowly being lifted higher, slowly being pulled towards the ball. He laughed and gibbered. His eyes kept widening, then rolling back before rolling back down and widening again and again rapidly. His cheeks were twitching and his body hung limp, like he was in a state of total relaxation. Jay ran away. I fell to my knees. When the man came within an inch of the orb floating above us, his limbs hanging down like swaying vines, all the shapes swam into one point on the orb, and the old man's mouth stretched open again, wider than it ever had, and an absolute racket of radio static and music crackled out of his mouth, the shapes echoing it. C screamed again, barely audible under all this noise, and then suddenly the shapes all shot up straight, breaking out of the orb, and there was a huge flash of light, like a dozen fireworks had gone off all at once. For an instant, all noise ceased. I mean, it didn't just stop. It was like everything was muted. C's mouth was still open. I could still see it vibrating, but not a noise came out. The old man's limp body and the radio fell to the ground silently. I myself was trying to scream, but nothing came out. Then, gradually, like when you clear your ears after being underwater, the sounds came back. "Come on, guys, let's get the fuck out of here," Jay was shaking C, shouting. I was still frozen. The old man moaned something out before jumping to his feet with vigor beyond his years. His eyes were still white. He yelped something and pranced towards the radio, picked it up, and started running towards us with a big grin on his face, the radio outstretched like he was offering it to us. But we were already running away with everything we had. I got in the car, turned on the engine, and we were out of there in no time. We drove aimlessly, without saying a word until we came across a hotel and booked in. I ended up breaking C's shocks with how I was driving through the dirt road at full force. We went back to get our stuff the next day. We did not go by that camp where the old man had been, and we were in and out. We never went back. Sometimes I think it's just some crazy dream I had, but C will remind me that it was real. After we left, Jay never wanted to talk about it again. C sold the cabin for much cheaper than it was worth. He just couldn't go back there. Our annual camping trips came to an end then and there. Sometimes still, though, I have vivid dreams about that ball of shapes and light. They whisper to me, whisper things that I cannot understand. I still have absolutely no idea what we saw out there that night. Not even the slightest clue. Welcome. I am the Frail Blaze. Today's story, Stalingrad, 1942. I was freezing, wet, exhausted and red-eyed at dawn. My comrades had lost their lives around me and in the front line of mud, blood, and snow. My gun was pointed at the German front. I was firing blindly. Where I was told to, when I was told to. Dodging the ceaseless barrage of light machine gun fire directed my way, my commanding officer told my comrades and me to get ready to charge. It was the order of my unwilling suicide. Charge! I heard the commander scream with terror in his lungs. I did as I was told. We all did. I climbed out of the trench of mud and wood, screaming with an energy I didn't know I had left. The first few steps I took were painted with a crimson mist. Pawns of war fell. I was deafened by the screams and gunfire of my comrades. I ran faster than I thought I could, past the fallen and the barbed wire. While running, I tripped over a body. I fell on my head, and I fell unconscious. I awakened to silence, finding it hard to breathe, suffocated almost, as if a heavy weight was pressing down on my body. Panic gripped me as I struggled to scream for help, but my constricted throat barely allowed a whimper to escape. I crawled out of the corpse pile that I was at the edge of. I saw the silhouette of a man kneeling with his gun to his chin. "Wait," I said. Bang. My stomach twisted and turned. I clutched my stomach and threw up. I looked down and realized I had thrown up in the face of one of my comrades. I fell on my back. I could tell how much time had passed. The sky showed me beautiful stars, starkly contrasted by the carnage I'd woken up to. I heard nothing. Not a shot, not a shout, not a whisper, not a scream. Just my panicked breathing. I felt as though I was walking through a graveyard of silence. I picked up my gun and slowly advanced towards the German line. My footsteps echoed through eerie silence. "Artyom! Artyom! Artyom!" I heard in my ears. It was no more than a whisper, but it felt so loud, vibrating through my head down to my feet. "Who's there?" I shouted, stopping dead in my tracks. No reply. The whisper continued. "Artyom! Artyom, you left us to die." Mumbles turned into a loud whimper. I frantically turned around, trying to find the source of the sound, but it just grew louder, now continuous. "Artyom, pay your debt. Join us." It shrieked in a deep, sorrowful voice. I heard something move behind me and I spun around. A decapitated cadaver stood looming over me. His uniform was drenched in mud and blood. He raised his hand, only his index finger remaining, more a stump of flesh resembling a hand. He pointed behind me. I turned around, and as I did, the snow on the ground shifted. To my horror, hundreds of lifeless bodies emerged, all standing upright. Then, simultaneously, they pointed behind me. The headless corpse was mere inches from my face, and in its outstretched palm, a pistol gleamed in the moonlight. Without hesitation, I took the firearm and, as if on cue, the cadavers collapsed back to the ground. "I'm sorry, comrades. I will make it up to you." I clutched the pistol, knelt on my knees, felt cold steel under my chin, and cocked it. "I will see you soon, comrades." The sharp gunshot echoed across the battlefield, but there was none left to hear it. Only the ghosts of my fallen comrades remained, watching as I paid my debt and joined them in death. Welcome to the Frail Plays. Our story this time, The Creature Under My Bed. I never stick my feet out from under my bed anymore. Why? Every time I did, something tried to grab me and drag me under the bed. I told my parents, They don't care enough to listen to me. Now, all I hear every night is, "Join me. I want to be your friend." My blanket dangles to the floor, and I can sense movement, like he's trying to pull on it just slightly. And I hear faint tapping noises from beneath my bed. It's very unsettling. But no one believes me, so I'm left with no choice but to try to ignore it. It took my favorite blanket and dragged it under the bed. I'll just have to use another one from the closet. But it's getting hard to ignore. Now it's leaving me things on my bed that I swear I have never owned before. Like a toy car, or certain dolls. Where is it getting these things? How is it getting these things? Did it take more children before trying with me? I feel like it's going to eternally try to pull me under, constantly tempting me with toys and taking blanket after blanket away. If it's so strong, why doesn't it just take me? I'm not sure what it wants from me, and I have no idea what I'm going to do. The only thing I know for certain, I'm on my own. Our story this time. I have a special visitor. At night, I have a special visitor that comes to see me. After Mommy tucks me into bed, I stay up waiting for him. He knocks on my window, and I let him in. He told me his name was Steve. At first, I was scared because I thought he might be a monster. But he said he was a friend of Mommy's. He plays dolls and house with me. We have tea parties, and he lets me show him all my princess dresses. I'm really sad when he has to leave, but he says Mommy doesn't like him there, even though they are friends. I'm not supposed to tell her. Steve said he would take me on a trip one day if Mommy lets him. We will go on a road trip to Disneyland and eat all the good snacks and go on my favorite rides. I can't wait, but he says not right now because it would make Mommy mad. I really, really want to go, so I ask Mommy why she doesn't like her friend Steve anymore. She acted really weird and dropped her cup on the floor. She said she didn't know anyone named Steve. But then Daddy asked her, "Didn't you have an ex-boyfriend named Steve?" I couldn't hear what she said, but she left, and I didn't get the chance to ask about the trip. I told Steve I was sad because we couldn't go, but he told me it was all right, that we'd still get to go someday. He said it was because he was my real daddy. He told me that if we wanted to go on the trip, all we had to do was get rid of the other daddy. I'm so excited. Our story this time is called My Father Was the Scariest Men I Ever Knew. My first memory is desperately trying to muffle my brother's cries. My dad is towering over us, yelling that we should shut the hell up. Crying always made Dad angry. Everything did, really. The old bastard died years ago, but he stays a part of me. I'm an angry girl, not easy to love. I have never had a boyfriend, never even had friends, really, except for my little brother. He's the functional one, doesn't even remember half the stuff Dad did to us. Just kind of blocked it out, I guess. He is able to live. He has tons of friends. He even managed to fall in love. And they had a baby girl. I always wanted kids. I never got the chance. The jealousy was eating me up. But I wasn't really angry at my brother. I understood why everyone preferred him over me. And he's the only one who ever loved me. That is, of course, until the night he asked me to babysit his kid. I still remember his screams, the terror in his eyes, the blood on the crib. Him trying so desperately to fix his only daughter, to make her breathe again. Have you ever seen someone giving CPR to a baby? It didn't work. I just stood by and watched everything. The trial was a blur. I barely even heard my sentence. Even now, the only thing I can focus on are my brother's letters. He hates me. He hates me for killing his baby girl. But he's kept in touch. After all, there was a time where we were the only good in each other's lives. He knows that I saved him back then. A bond that deep doesn't break easily. So, he keeps writing. I hold on to these letters. Every word about him recovering, him living, him thriving again, has been a tiny spark. A confirmation that I made the right call. That is, until I saw what he wrote yesterday. I'm going to be a dad again. I put the letter down quickly. I was feeling sick. My father was the scariest man I ever knew. Until I arrived at my brother's house that fateful evening and saw him standing over the crib covered in blood. "Shut up," he whispered. "Shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut the fuck up." I cleaned him up after. He just kept staring off into the distance, murmuring. And by the time I was done, he had just blocked it all out. So I took the blame. I took the sentence. He was my baby brother. He had a life to live. He's a good man. He's a kind man. One moment was all it took, and he does not even remember that moment. But I am sure when his next child arrives, my father will awaken once more. Tragedy in a family is so very hard to escape. Sometimes even easier to repeat. Let me know what you thought of this story in the comments below, or if you know of any other stories you'd like me to read. I do hope you'll join me in the future for more Frail Blaze Tales.